What's up? Welcome back and Happy New Year's as well. We're back with another video in my series about the Federalist Papers, and today we'll be going over Federalist 2 through 5, all written by John Jay. Today we're also trying out some new lighting. I'm not a huge fan of the intense white light that my room has, so I've got my two lamps going. So let me know if you like that in the comments. I am also getting over a head cold right now. I've been sick the past couple days, so we're going to try to sound sick as hell in the best way possible, not so much in the bad way that I'm feeling. But I wanted to get this video out before New Year's. I'm really excited for this one. I want to put videos out. So here we are. And with that, I think we should start out with kind of talking about who John Jay is, like who wrote these papers, get a little bit of a reminder of what the Federalist Papers are in case you didn't see the first video. And then we'll jump into the summary and then the analysis. John Jay was, of course, a founding father, and despite not being on any money, his influence is definitely strong. He was born in New York and was a pretty notable revolutionary during the war, suppressing loyalists in the state. He also served in the Continental Congress, and according to John Adams, he was the most important negotiator for the Treaty of Paris, which ended the revolution and secured American independence. He went to Columbia University and was a lawyer, and George Washington appointed him the first Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, where he set a lot of the precedents for how the judiciary would run. He set up a lot of circuits and also made sure that the judiciary was fully independent from the other two branches of government and maintained separation of powers. After his time in the federal government, he went on to become governor of New York, where he actually passed the legislation that would end slavery in the state. And of course, most relevant to our discussion today, he was a big supporter of central government and the Constitution and wrote 5 of the 85 Federalist Papers. Federalist 2 in particular is considered one of the most important of the body of work and uses the arguments in 3, 4, and 5 as a pedestal to sit on top of. Quick reminder for anyone who hasn't seen my first video, go watch it. But also, the Federalist Papers are a series of essays co-authored by Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and John Jay under the pseudonym of Publius, where they argue for the adoption of the American Constitution. It's largely considered the most important work in American political philosophy ever written, and it's had its hand in shaping American politics pretty much since the Constitution itself was written. So they're very important. And with that, I think we're good to go ahead and hop into this. Actually, one more thing before we hop into this. I didn't mention this enough in the first video, and that is just how incredibly written these papers are. They truly are amazing to read, super persuasive, amazing arguments. They borderline on poetry quite often. And yeah, it's just really no wonder these guys were able to make a nation. I mean, they're incredibly persuasive and really just like superhuman communicators. It's awesome. Jumping into Federalist 2, Jay, speaking as Publius, comes right out the gate with a reminder of the stuff Hamilton was talking about in the first paper, in particular that Americans are embarking on what he believes is the most important and interesting thing that a human can do, which is creating a nation. And he also lets us know that he thinks government is the most important thing, period. He hits on a note from John Locke and the social contract tradition, telling the American people that since it is necessary to give up some of their natural rights to the government, they need to consider whether it's most advantageous for them to do that in separate confederacies or individual states, or as a union. And then he goes on throughout all 4 papers praising the American people for their dedication to unity uh, in the face of divisive actors, influence, and ideas. And he encourages us to keep that up. Like Hamilton, Jay turns to Providence to explain that the American people seem to have been made for the circumstances that they find themselves in. We are one united people living on a land that itself seems to be bound and connected through the many rivers and canals that crisscross the nation, suiting us well for unity rather than separation. Now, here he does say something a little bit odd that Americans all come from one people, language, tradition, and religion. which is a common argument even today, although unfortunately it is just as untrue today as it was then. America has always been a hodgepodge of many different immigrant communities from different backgrounds, cultures, religions, and always different languages as well. Despite that, I do think that the point he's trying to make stands, which is that Americans have developed their own distinct culture unique in the world, and that culture itself is much better suited towards unity than separation. He then does take a quick jab at the Articles of Confederation, pointing out their weakness. Although he is empathetic when he does this, he points out that the reason for the weakness is the conditions that they were written under. During the times of the Revolution, there was no time to fully debate the finer details of government. This is where he picks up an argument for the Constitution, pointing out that the members of the Constitutional Convention were wise and experienced men who all had the trust of the American people, and that in times of peace they, quote, passed many months in cool, uninterrupted, and daily consultation over the questions of how the government should be arranged. He further bolsters their legitimacy by pointing out that they bring knowledge from all parts of the Union, and that a lot of these men served in the Revolution and previous Continental Congresses and were concerned about nothing other than the public good, which is another callback to what Hamilton talked about in the first paper. Jay then reminds the reader that all previous Congresses have believed that the Union is essential to the security and liberty of the American people, and he then states his belief that a strong central government is the only way to preserve the Union itself. He then finishes the paper off with a statement on if the Union dissolved, which I think is great, so I'm going to read it to you now. That certainly would be the case, and I sincerely wish that it may be as clearly foreseen by every good citizen that whenever the dissolution of the Union arrives, America will have the reason to exclaim, in the words of the poet, "Farewell, a long farewell to all of my greatness." Now that Hamilton and Jay have both firmly built up Publius's view that the Union is the best way to protect American security and liberty against individual interests, foreign interests, and all types of disaster, Federalists 3 through 5 now give us specific arguments as to why that is. Federalist 3 starts out by arguing that safety must be the first concern of any people, to secure peace and tranquility, to protect themselves against foreign influence as well as similar domestic problems. Security must be the first thing any nation gets up to. And of course, Jay argues the Union is the best way to do this. He first looks at the Union's ability to prevent hostility from abroad. He reasons that the amount of wars that happen in the world are equal to the amount of causes, real or pretended. And now he goes over pretended causes in Federalist 4. For this third paper, he mainly focuses on real, or what he calls just causes for war. He observes that having many different individual states or confederacies would create many different interests and potential relationships that they could have with foreign nations, and this would multiply the reasons that a just war might break out. The same thought extends to any alliances that might put the states at odds with each other for whatever reason. However, the biggest problem that Jay outlines here is that any bordering nations will always have the most reasons to go to war with each other. This is because their physical closeness creates many more opportunities for war to break out, such as territorial disputes, competing economic interests, or the rights to use different trade routes or waterways. He argues, in regards to these foreign problems, it is of high importance to the peace of America that she observe the laws of nations towards all these powers, and to me it appears evident that this will be more perfectly and punctually done by one national government than it could be either by 13 separate states or by 3 or 4 distinct confederacies. And of course, on the domestic side, the Union would solve this problem because there would be one united national interest as well as free trade and transportation between the states. In addition, the national government would benefit from having a vast pool of qualified statesmen to choose from to lead it, much better than any individual state could pull off. And because of that, this will result in more favorable trade, but also in better policies and relations with foreign nations that would further reduce causes for just war. Having such a variety in population would also help balance out the tempers of border states against the nations they border. The things the government would do would carry more weight than any individual state or confederacy could, and it would also limit the harm that individual interests from one part of the nation could do unto the rest of the Union. And now remember that part because that's going to come back in a big way in Federalist 10 later on. Publius submits that for these reasons, the Union will be best able to prevent real or just causes for war, foreign or domestic, than any collection of separate governments could. And then he concludes with three specific European examples as to why this is the case. Now that real or just causes for war have been addressed, Federalist 4 turns our attention towards pretended causes, quickly pointing out that any nation will find a way to go to war if they think that they could benefit from it, and that monarchs in particular will just go to war over nothing if they feel a little bit offended, even if their nation stands to gain nothing for it, or perhaps might even be hurt by it. Jay believes that the main source for these pretended causes would be the flourishing of America, especially in commerce. Being rivals with Europe, he thinks it's only natural that they would seek to stifle America for their own benefit, like restricting access to the Mississippi River or to various fisheries that the European nations would have interests in keeping to themselves. Now, this point he makes about fisheries, I think, is really interesting because he actually held up negotiations during the Treaty of Paris for months in order to secure American fishing rights in Newfoundland. So that's just a fun little thing to think about. In short, Europeans seeking to kneecap American prosperity would invent causes for war that wouldn't otherwise occur via natural competition. Now, would you believe me if I told you the solution to all these problems is the Union? Well, you really should believe me because that's kind of the point of all of this. Not only would the union provide the same benefit to trade as it would government, giving us a large pool of the most skilled individuals for commerce, the strength in the union would also make foreign powers more prone to having a good relationship with us rather than bullying us and forcing us into made up conflicts. Now, the last page of this paper goes really hard, so I'm just going to read that to you real quick. But whatever may be our situation, whether firmly united under one national government or split into a number of confederacies, certain it is that the foreign nations will know and view it exactly as it is, and they will act towards us accordingly. If they see that our national government is efficient and well administered, our trade prudently regulated, our militia properly organized and disciplined, our resources and finances discreetly managed, our credit reestablished, our people free, contented, and united, they will be much more disposed to cultivate our friendship than provoke our resentment. If, on the other hand, they find us either destitute of an effectual government, each state doing right or wrong as to its rulers may seem convenient, or split into three or four independent and probably discordant republics or confederacies, one inclining to Britain, another to France, and a third to Spain, and perhaps played off each other by the three, what a poor, pitiful figure will America make in their eyes! How liable would she become not only to their contempt, but to their outrage, and how soon would dear bought experience proclaim that when a people or family so divide, it never fails to be against themselves. Moving on from that absolute banger to Federalist 5, we get one final note on the usefulness of the Union. Jay takes Publius down a train of thought as to what he thinks would happen if America split into different nations, whatever the number may be. And he uses history from the various kingdoms of Britain as well as conflicts between European states to kind of figure out what he thinks would happen to us in this situation. As established, bordering nations will always have more reasons to go to war with each other than far off nations. And because of this, Jay worries that if America were to disunite, they would fall into various alliances with European nations and be thrown into conflict for their benefit. He also expresses concern that the separate states could never remain equal, pointing out the relative difference in strength between the northern states and the southern ones, and worries that in the case of separation, the stronger states would tend towards the conquest of the weaker ones. And something fun here is he calls the northern states like a beehive is how he refers to them, which is something that happens at least one more time. I think Hamilton does it, although that might have been Madison. We'll find out when I go back and make those videos, but I just think that's funny. He also worries that differing commercial interests would further put the states at odds with each other and increase real causes for war. And in these conflicts and their probable use of European alliances, he also worries that Europeans themselves would also take to the conquest of the states, saying, and here let us not forget how much more easy it is to receive foreign fleets into our ports and foreign armies into our country than it is to persuade or compel them to depart. I'll leave this summary of Federalist 2 through 5 with one last quote from the start of the fifth paper. This is a letter from Queen Anne to the Scottish as to why she thinks that there should be a union between them and England. An entire and perfect union will be the solid foundation of lasting peace. It will secure your religion, liberty, and property. Remove the animosities amongst yourselves and the jealousies and differences betwixt our two kingdoms. It must increase your strength, riches, and trade, and by this union the whole island, being joined in affection and free from all apprehensions of different interests, will be enabled to resist all its enemies, being the only effectual way to secure our present and future happiness and disappoint the designs of our and your enemies, who will doubtless on this occasion use their utmost endeavors to prevent or delay this union. So that finishes up our summary of John Jay's essays here. So now the question is, what can we learn from it today? Well, of course, the first and most obvious thing that I'm sure we'll come back to over and over is the usefulness of the Union in preserving American freedom, liberty, security, and independence. It is the best way to preserve the strength of the people, fend off our enemies, and encourage good relations with the rest of the world. So, because of all that, I think some reflection on what the Union means and what it means for us to have enemies is a good idea here. Let's first clarify that we, the people, are one in the Union. Every state, county, city, town, individual, we're all one in the Union. And so it's for all of our benefit to secure that. So, what does it mean then for us to have enemies? Well, foreign adversaries don't need a whole lot of explanation. Of course, we're always going to be competing with foreigners and they will have competing interests with us. That's just the nature of things. And it only makes sense that our greatest rivals will stand to benefit from the dissolution of the Union. What I find much more troubling and nefarious are individual interests that arise from within the Union. I mean, by definition, these are disunited individuals who have determined that the dissolution or at least weakening of the Union would be to their benefit. Remember what Hamilton warned us about in Federalist 1? That these individual interests would seek to divide up the Union in order to more easily be able to appropriate our wealth. We figured out who these people are in the last video. I mean, just ask yourself who would stand to benefit from the Union being weak and divided. It's not some liberal living in New York, and it's not some farmer in Idaho. It's billionaires, shareholders, CEOs, the one percenters who accumulate more of the nation's wealth every quarter at the detriment of the people. And as this happens, the Union and the people within it become weaker and more vulnerable to foreign interests, which, coincidentally, start to align more and more with our multinational corporations and one percenters than those same corporations and individuals align with the people of the United States. That's what concerns me today. We hear from the same class of people who stand to gain from dividing us about some enemy from within. They point us towards our fellow citizens as something that needs to be exterminated, and they brew conflict within the Union. It seems quite obvious to me that this is being done so that way particular factions of the rich and powerful can do exactly what Hamilton, Jay, and as we'll see later, Madison all feared would happen to us, divide us and profit at our expense. But I'll leave that conversation there for this video. It's already getting kind of long, and we'll have plenty of opportunity to talk about it later when we talk about Federalist 10, so stay tuned for that. The other big thing I want to talk about from Jay's papers is security and liberty. For the past 20 or so years, this nation has been moving pretty consistently towards a surveillance state, and it brings up a lot of questions of what are our rights to privacy and what is considered an unreasonable search. I recently heard that traffic cameras are being used to just autonomously track your driving habits, and if they decide that you're shady, then they will find you, pull you over for some infraction that they make up, and use that as an excuse to search you. Does that violate our Fourth Amendment? Does that violate our rights to privacy or transportation? This brings to mind that quote from Benjamin Franklin: those who would give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety. And yet, contrary to the discourse that we hear today, especially among the kind of people who use that quote, Jay seems to think of security as something very important to liberty rather than being opposed to it. So, what's up with that? So, to better understand this, I started looking for context to that Franklin quote, and it didn't take a lot of digging, but I quickly found out that what he was referencing there was people looking for the king to give them security rather than depending on themselves for it. So, with that in mind, what he seems to have actually meant with that quote is that if you look for your security through somebody else's power rather than your own, you'll quickly find that your freedom will be destroyed along with that security that you attempted to trade it for. So, what does this tell us about Jay's writing? Well, I think firstly, it shows us that him and Franklin were a lot more closely aligned than they first appear. They're both telling us that security is absolutely essential, but it must be found within ourselves, using our own liberty and freedom to secure it rather than looking outwards for it, not giving up one for the other, but using them together to make each of them greater than they were before. Security and liberty, like all things, are in dialogue with each other, and how each influences the other will determine who remains free and secure and who will become subjugated and oppressed. The key lies in the union. With it, the people are at our strongest and able to flex our muscles to collectively secure our liberty and freedom. The alternative to looking for security within the union is to look for it within individual interests. In Franklin and Jay's time, it was the crown. In our time, it's government corporate alliances like Flock, Palantir, and digital services like Google. When we run to these interests and trade our liberty for their surveillance capital security, we deserve to and will lose both. Now, on that bright and wonderful note, I think that's probably enough for today. We've still got like 20 of these videos to get through, so we'll have plenty of time to continue the discussion. So stay tuned for the next one. And as always, if you enjoyed this video, if you learned anything from it, I would greatly appreciate it if you gave this video a like, if you commented, and subscribed. It really does mean a lot for me, and it encourages me to make more of these videos and do it faster. So a giant thanks to anybody who does engage with the videos. And with that, stay safe, stay curious, and above all, stay united. See you in the next one.